All right, welcome everyone to the first of a two-week, story we're going to tell about Philip K. Dick adaptations.
Yeah, he's one of the most famous sci-fi writers. Actually got a little more famous after he died in the 80s, but was actually a successful and very profitable writer. He wasn't mainstream at the time until after his death with the emergence of Blade Runner.
Yeah, and I know he's probably my favorite science fiction writer, even though I haven't broached as many of his works as I'd like to.
Yeah.
I kind of reverse engineered my, excitement about Philip K. Dick with the film we're talking about today, Minority Report, and then from there went to Blade Runner, Total Recall, the films, and then I kind of went back a step and started reading the works that they were based on. And he's kind of one of those guys where he's written so many projects, but because the title changes and because most of his films have a pretty drastic change in how they're actually portrayed and presented, that he kind of falls by the wayside in that way.
Philip K. Dick definitely has a theme involved with his movies, kind of like a question of identities, questions of phantom realities, phantom peoples, and stuff like that. So definitely,
and he loves to play with things like humanity versus what makes us human, what keeps us from being human.
Like the entire Blade Runner series is all about empathy. Can you be a good person without having any empathy at all? So
yeah. So definitely. So today, talking about Minority Report from 2002, a Steven Spielberg film, I believe his first work with Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
And we're going to break down, the film itself, talk a little bit about how it was translated from the source material, and our overall thoughts on this film, because it's been a long time since I watched this one.
Is it good to stop a crime before it even being committed?
Exactly. And so we're going to film an episode and present it to you before we even existed today on Kyle and Nick on Film, so stay tuned with us, okay? All right, everybody, welcome back to Kyle and Nick on Film. Of course, I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe from GoetheFilmReviews.com.
I'm Nick Palodichuk, the host of the St. Paul Filmcast. You can find on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. Today, we're going to talk about one of the big blockbusters for Colin Farrell.
This is my first noticing of Colin Farrell as a character in a film. I think he does great at villainous roles or anti-heroic roles in a lot of ways.
Right.
And I really remember he was the standout for this whole movie for me. The big takeaway was Colin Farrell.
The first movie that he ever did was called Tigerland, if you haven't seen it yet. But this was his big blockbuster. And, of course, it helps to be into a Spielberg film and make your big blockbuster moment. Colin Farrell, I think, does better not being an action hero. I think he takes, a little more risks.
I think so. I think he does better, again, on the less heroic side of things. I think he does better when he's not the main character, to be honest. Or very amongst a group of other characters. Like an ensemble piece, sure. But I think he does his best work when he's aiding a story.
So don't do another Philip K. Dick Total Recall remake, Colin.
Yeah, definitely. You've had your chance. But no, we can think about things and again, the film Alexander had way more problems than just Colin Farrell. But looking at him especially, I think he did this great resurgence of things like the Fright Night remake, which was surprisingly good. In Bruges, we recently talked about Seven Psychopaths. He does do
comedy, yeah.
He has a great knack for comedy that isn't really funny. It's not supposed to be funny, and he minds it really well, I guess. So.
And he's not afraid to take risks like Lobster.
Yep, he's not against trying new things, and that's kind of what keeps him interesting for me.
Oh.
Definitely. First collaboration between Tom Cruise and Steven Spielberg. It's one of those things where they've worked together, a couple of times, and you think to yourself, this is a perfect collaborating team, much like Spielberg had this with a couple of people, of course, Tom Hanks a few times, he worked with Leo DiCaprio a few times, and Tom Cruise just kind of has that good connection with him, I think.
This is kind of weird, because it has a Total Recall connection to it, because when Total Recall came out in 1992, it was optioned to do Minority Report with it, and it was attached. Spielberg's been attached since the mid-90s to do that. Some things got in the way, he wanted, all of a sudden, Kubrick died, and then Spielberg wanted to pick up AI to start production. Kubrick actually was supposed to do AI, and Spielberg took over. Production lasted a little bit longer, so delay of Minority Report came 10 years after the fact. So it took about 10 years of development. And then Colin Farrell does a remake of Total Recall. So it's kind of like this incest.
Yes. It's all going around in circles. And maybe that's kind of one of the things that, we like to experiment with in Philip K. Dick's work, is that kind of revolving consciousness.
Yeah.
And that's kind of done here as well. The film opens, and I think I see Minority Report opening in a very uncomfortable way for a Steven Spielberg film. He likes to put all of his pieces in play pretty easily, and we open up with the dream from the precogs about what's going to happen, and then we get to actually see this version of Tom Cruise as John Anderton doing the pre-crime like analysis, breaking it down, and actually get to see him in action to set up the film. It's a very much it's interesting because it's not really an action-packed opening.
And it's not really like a Spielberg movie, right?
Yeah, it's a very dramatic opening where there's a lot of vocal action. There's a lot of, like analysis happening, and it works very well, actually, I think.
Compared to like another typical Spielberg movie where you get your action first.
Just a couple years before he did Saving Private Ryan, which is
you get your
35 minutes of action at the opening.
That's what Spielberg likes. You learn from Kurosawa. You get your action first out, like Raiders and,
absolutely.
Jaws and all that stuff.
And so it's very much, it's a dream sequence opening where we're trying to he basically throws all the pieces out on the board and says, assemble this puzzle without looking at the box. And I think it's a very, very captivating opening. I think it's one of my favorite parts of the movie.
There's a lot of superimposing, a lot of layers in the movie. Very glossy, very gray and bluish too. He used to this, so it's almost like it almost could be a black and white.
Yeah, this is a film of the early 2000s visually. It's got that. I don't want to call it there's not a lot of lens flare to it, but it almost seems like a precursor to J.J. Abrams is more like lens flare-y, super glossy, super bright and shiny, which is funny because when he was talking with Janusz Kaminski, who does all of his cinematography for years, he said, I want this to be the ugliest, dirtiest movie we've ever made. I can see that in elements, and when I read that, I kind of was looking at parts of the film differently, seeing it is true, it's not very clean, but it is glossy.
Right, usually Philip K. Dick stories, very dirty world, like Blade Runner's been very dirty, like they had to use these old arrows, vacuums up the atmosphere. Total Recall's supposed to be dirty. A lot of the tone, a lot of the development of Philip K. Dick stories are non-clean worlds.
And I think that's something to take away. Everyone assumes that the future is going to be this bright, shiny, glossy thing, and maybe that's a great thing to focus on and try to be, but the future is always going to have its good and its bad. We are never going to get towards the holier than thou existence of being perfect human beings, because humanity is the search for perfection. So
like I mentioned in the intro, Philip K. Dick is basically exploring the idea that you stop a crime before you even commit it. Is it moral? Is it correct? And the dangers of doing so. And so the person who's an advocate for this notion, Anderton, played by Tom Cruise, actually gets caught up in the spokes of turning against himself. So somebody you're being charged with a pre-crime. No, well, yes, that's how it works.
Yeah, and I think that's the fascinating part of it is you get the man who's known the system. And, a couple weeks back, we talked about Forrest Whitaker's character in Panic Room being he knows the system of Panic Room, so he can subvert it, he can, kind of get around it. Tom Cruise's John Anderton is doing the same thing here, trying to work around his own eventual killing of someone he's never met. And the idea, I like the idea that, we, again, early on in the film, we get our rules. Colin Farrell's character is probing for how this kind of world works. And not having the red ball means that you have a premeditated murder, and you will have a 4 days, I think they said, was the biggest window. We break down to 36 hours before this murder. And so he knows it's a man he's never met, but he's going to kill him in a day and a half. That's a very captivating jump start into the film.
So you get your time, you get your story. A lot of, if you've ever been a writer, you get those are kind of the increments, and we get a little bit of the weather involved too.
Exactly, yeah. So I really like this dynamic between Cruise and Farrell. The hunter becoming the hunted. The way that Cruise interacts with Max von Sydow, who I think you wouldn't expect those two actors to have chemistry. But I did find that they had a very father-son kind of chemistry. They work very well together. Of course, Samantha Morton, who doesn't get as many great giant roles. She's recently been working on The Walking Dead. She did Fantastic Beasts. She plays Agatha, one of the precogs that we get to interact with a little bit more. Yeah. And she does a lot with a little bit of space because she doesn't talk a lot. A lot of it's visual, physical, a lot of eye work. Yes. And she really captivates that in a lot of ways, being a mysterious character too.
I do like the arc they build up because obviously it is a mystery, grounded in a mystery, even though it's a sci-fi. But you get up the build up, and then you get your little aha moments and little trinkets. It does have a big, gigantic payoff at the end.
Yeah, and I think what's funny to me is you see the ways in which Philip K. Dick builds such a mythology and a world around each of his stories that it's kind of a playground for the director to work in.
I see that, yeah.
And Spielberg set up a really nice ending there, and he kind of goes against, in some ways, what Philip K. Dick's story ended in a very Spielbergian kind of a way. Like, it's very much a child of that. But it's fun to know that he took the source material, looked it over, read with the script, and actually brought in a team of people to help him design what the future of 2054 would look like. And having all that kind of care and detail put into a science fiction film is really strong, and it does kind of lend to that unique ending that comes with this film.
This actually got published in a book called, a magazine called Fantastic Universe in the 50s, where sci-fi was an explosion. The whole genre was actually exploding. The interest of space exploration came out in the 50s. Fantastic Universe was the elite magazine for sci-fi stories and publications, and it was a high end. It was very expensive to buy at the time. And this was the leading story in one of its publications in 1954. So a lot of people are aware of this. And the notion of kind of, the end comes back to the middle. It's almost kind of like, the Bruce Willis movie.
12 Monkeys.
12 Monkeys.
Yeah.
They're the same kind of components of bookends.
Yeah, and kind of being able to, does knowing your future change your future?
Yeah. This is why you
free will versus determinism is very strong here. And that's something like, I watched this film, right when it came out. I remember it was a birthday movie for me. I was so excited to see this one on my birthday. That was how excited I was. And I remember not really realizing how terrifying the concepts played with in this film are. The idea that you can be arrested for a murder you didn't commit yet, and be punished in such a way that you basically go brain dead for the rest of your life in a dream state. And like the way that we treat people that we haven't even proven guilty. And it's got a lot of like play into like, what are our police allowed to do? And I think right now, especially, that's a really powerful discussion that's being had, is kind of like what are our police supposed to be doing in the effort to protect us? And this is very much an overreach kind of a piece.
So that's why the payoff for sci-fi is, and even though it's a fantasy story and it's in the future, it has a lot of components of what reality and now what we're dealing with now. It actually can explore it much more in depth, being a sci-fi story. Yeah,
because you're able to ask those questions without really picking an answer. Like, that's the best part about sci-fi, is you get to ask a lot of questions, but you don't feel compelled to have to force your answer on anybody. It's purely there to get you thinking. That's why it's the thinking man's kind of fiction, is the science fiction. I love that. Like many of the films we've talked about, Blade Runner especially, which we talked about last season on Kyle and Nick on Films, we ask a lot of questions about humanity and things like that, and we never really get answers. We have to make our own answers, or wait till a sequel. But with Minority Report, we get a lot of questions in this one, and I don't feel like Philip K. Dick's source material or Spielberg's film answer them, but they allow you to take them away.
This won't be the only time Spielberg and Tom Cruise worked together. They actually did another sci-fi script, War of the Worlds, which is another fantastic story.
And another one that alters drastically from the source material. So I think that they have a good chemistry together, and I think Cruise was brought into the world of action. Like he was forced into a leading man role. If you look earlier in his career, before he was the leading man, he did have some good chops, but then he was forced into kind of like, you must be a leading man in all films. And I do think there were some performance issues throughout early parts of his career where he was just focused on the popcorn action star. This is a film that reins him in and turns him into a little bit more thought-provoking. The sequences where he's watching the old videos of his son and wife, really hard to watch, because like you do feel for what he's going through, and having that element of like, why is he in this situation, this mystery around a man he may have to kill, who he's never met, is interesting because it plays into his personal issues that he's dealing with. So I think that's really kind of cool to see.
Definitely the book is less action movie. It's more of a visceral account of how can I have committed a crime, and his investigation of the discoveries of there could be a minority report, like there's always three cogs, and they all have to agree, all three of them, on a vision, and if one does not, then it becomes a minority report, and then one becomes a majority report, and then there's a lot of bureaucratic cut and all that stuff. So
it's one of those questions that we, again, like having three precogs. I love that line from Lois Smith's character in the film where she says like they're never wrong, but sometimes they disagree. And it's like, I'd love to just take some time and pause and really dig into that line of dialogue, because it's a really fascinating piece there. And Lois Smith does a lot of the heavy lifting because she was her character that she plays is the one who basically helped create the program, and then she was shuttered out of it. And it asks the question of like the creator being taken away from their own work and what they do, and the work being manipulated to someone else's viewpoint. Kind of plays into like that role in like the writer versus the director in a lot of ways too. So. But I really did enjoy Lois Smith as an actress, kind of because she doesn't get a lot of work. So
yeah, and Neil McDowell. If you ever brought him up, Neil McDowell, the good guy cop. Well, he thinks he's a good guy. He thinks he's doing a good. Yeah,
he's doing what he knows to be right based on what he has, I guess. So that's kind of good to have. And Neil McDonough is another guy, kind of like Colin Farrell, that I think he skews better when he's more villainous. But he's just a great secondary character. For your Marvel fans, you get to see him in Captain America: The First Avenger. He's jumped around in that kind of world and those kinds of action-y roles, and I do think he's one of those guys that can do action with heart. I do like Neil McDonough, though.
Yeah.
So, Nick, we both seemingly enjoyed the film. Do you recommend it for our viewers?
I think if you haven't seen it yet, it's very poignant to see it now. Mm-hmm. I think there's more relevance to what's going on now than it was in 2002. Definitely check out Colin Farrell's really breakout performance and the legendary Max von Sydow.
Yeah, we lost him earlier this year, if I'm correct. Yeah. And the man worked for so many decades. I think he was one of the longest still working performers on his passing, where he had worked in every single decade from I think it was the 40s on.
Yeah.
And he is. This was the first film I saw him in. I believe, and it wasn't until later that he's permeated a lot of our film landscape right now, being in a Star Wars film, being on Game of Thrones, and then of course for classic films with Ingmar Bergman. But he's never really strayed from the pop culture zeitgeist.
No.
So it's really fun to see him in this
role. He did every genre you can think of.
Yep, and I think he probably created a few. So
probably filmed in every country you can think of.
Exactly. So I agree. I definitely recommend this one. It was a real treat to be able to revisit Minority Report because it's been at least 10 years since I saw this film last, and I remembered all the things I loved about it and all the ways that it inspired me in my younger years to ask questions. And I think that's what this film does for a large bulk of it, and it's not something Spielberg's used to, and it's not something Cruise is used to, but they really get a good melding together, and you can see their growth together, along with the growth of John Williams as the scorer.
And it's definitely a new adventure for Spielberg. It's not a very conventional Spielberg movie. Mm-hmm. He does a lot of risk of superimposing and layers and structures for the dream sequences, and the ending is very a Brian De Palma ending to it.
Yeah. It's not wholly bleak, but it's not wholly inspiring. It's kind of in that muddly middle ground, I guess, where it doesn't really feel great, but it definitely gives us what we need to move on. The film was followed by a one-season TV show on Fox, actually, and I didn't realize that was kind of set up as like a follow-up 10 years later. I never got a chance to check it out, but
I don't think anybody did.
Yeah, that's why it lasted one season, of course. So. But we do want to know what you guys think. If you've seen Minority Report, if you haven't, hey, now's a great time to go check it out. You got all this time at home still, and like Nick said, it feels like this film is like perfect for a rewatch now.
Now
we're asking a lot of questions about the film, and I do think now is a great time to revisit it or visit it for the first time. So let us know in the comment section below what you thought about the film. Hey, if you guys are interested in taking part in the conversation further, check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/KyleNickOnFilm. You guys can join the tiers there for as low as $1 a month. And we look to the Patreon for help in picking some of the different films that we talk about. So we will be much appreciated. You can support some independent content creators at the same time. If you can't support with finance, hey, check out, just give us a like, give us a share, give us a subscribe. Let us know what you think about the films that we talk about and get involved in the conversation. So, Nick, where can we find you?
You can find my podcast, the St. Paul Filmcast, on Stitcher, iTunes, and Google Play, where I interview local independent filmmakers from the Twin Cities, Minnesota area.
Wonderful. And you can find all my film reviews on goatfilmreviews.com. Check me out every single week here with Nick as we talk more film. You can find me online at Almighty Goatman for my thoughts. All right, everybody, thanks for joining us. Please take a moment to think about your future today and try not to commit any crimes.